Hi, everyone, and welcome to our next gen training, Overcome the Overwhelm, How to Manage Stress. I'm Candace Thorson, Managing Editor at GovLoop, and today I'm also your moderator. So I want to thank you so much for being here. And I want to give a special thank you to our partners, WEPA, American University, and GovEvents for putting on this session. So I think a lot of you probably know this, but today's session is part of our ongoing professional development series called NextGen. So we do monthly webinars like this one, as well as two big annual virtual conferences each year geared around similar topics. So today, for example, we're going to talk about stress, which is an exceptionally timely topic considering it's the holiday season. But right now, just take a deep breath and ask yourself this question and answer really honestly. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed out do you feel? Recent studies have shown that adults report higher stress levels than ever before. So however you answered that, if it was really high, super stressed, you're not alone. And that comes in your both personal and professional lives. And so as we enter this holiday season, the end of the year, thinking about the year ahead, it's important to check in with yourself and make sure that you have healthy ways to process and cope with stress. We have four experts today who are going to share how they cope and give us tips for us being able to do it. But I have a few housekeeping items first to just run over if you bear with me for a moment. If you're on Twitter, now known as X, which I still haven't made that mental transition yet, please share what you learned using the hashtag NextGenGov. We have great resources available for you on the console like we always do, so check those out. We also have closed captioning, and to access that feature, just go on the bottom right-hand side of your media player. If you have technical problems, which they occasionally do happen, just put a message in the Ask a Question tab, and Kelly, my colleague, will help you out. And you can use that same portal to ask questions of our experts, and they absolutely are interested in what you have to say, so please feel free. We have an open chat so that you can talk publicly among your fellow attendees, and that's you get to that by clicking on the blue group chat button that's in the middle of the screen. And then we are recording this whole session. So check your inboxes tomorrow because we're going to send you a link to the entire thing. And finally, we are giving out 1 CPE credit for your participation today. So to get the credit, you need to take all the polls, participate in the entire training, and then fill out the post-event evaluation form. So for our first poll question, we just want to know, how stressed are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10? So um, like 1 is not stressed at all, totally calm, I feel really good. 10 is incredibly stressed out, and you don't even know how you're going to go on to get to the end of the day. So we'll give you about 60 seconds to answer the question. And while you're answering the poll, I just want to introduce today's speakers. We have Victoria Bowen. She is Director, Strategic and Community Engagements with the DoD Office for Civil Rights and Equal Opportunity Policy. We have Brian Wilson, who is Organizational Change Management Lead with the SEC. We have Mika Cross, who's a transformational workforce expert. And we have Garth Cato Smelser, who is Mindful FED founder and Federal Executive Institute faculty chair with the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. So I want to thank all four of you so much for being here. We'll just start out to just lay the groundwork, and I guess I'll direct this at you, Brian, initially. So like stress manifests itself differently for different people. So just to sort of lay the groundwork, how do you feel yourself getting overwhelmed or stressed out? What does that look like for you personally?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Candace, and good afternoon, everyone. So, in my attempt to become more self-aware over the years, there's a couple areas where I can feel myself, where I can see that, I've entered that very stressful realm. One of them being, not wanting to engage in small talk. I tend to really enjoy speaking with people, very enthusiastic, and I can feel those levels, slowly, leaving my body when I'm, in that perceived stressful environment. And then, my wife calls me Jekyll and Hyde at times. My responses or remarks can get a bit snappy or snarky if I feel, some stress or anxiety happening. So for me, those are two areas that becoming more self-aware when it comes to reaching that point.
You kind of shut down, so the small talk just doesn't happen because you're just not open to it anymore. Garth, what does
Exactly.
that look like? What does that look like for you when you're getting stressed out or burned out? Like, how does that look like in your world?
I do share that short fuse with Brian, like noticing that, like, wow, that was kind of unnecessary to snap at my daughters because the dishes aren't done. So that's very real. And yet over time, I've learned to sort of move that backward and find it in my body, right? That stress, we think that stress is all up here. Stress is the whole system, right? It's the holistic system. And so it's taken me a lot of practice to start to walk that backward and like, oh, that my shoulders are a little up, like my proverbial hackles are up, or I have a tightness in my jaw, or why am I, chest breathing? Why do I have this pit in my stomach? And so that space of bodily awareness is then allows me kind of open up this like, oh, this is real. This is not just an idea in my head. This is a real experience in my body. And that gives me a little bit of space for inquiry about, okay, what's causing that? And then we started with the breath. That's the magic pivot, right? Is to take a breath and just feel those bodily sensations and then move on from there.
Yeah, that's so true. Sometimes when you're all stressed out, it's not until you realize like you're purposely trying to relax your shoulders or, that you realize exactly how tense you actually are. And I'm saying this because my shoulders are actually bothering me right now. Um, but Mika, what does it look like for you?
Well, I think all the things that Garth and Brian brought up, but also just being mindful that all stress is actually not negative. For instance, do
Oh,
any of you
sure.
enjoy the stress of, like, I don't know, a roller coaster, a good horror movie? Maybe you're running a marathon and it really sucks and is stressful as you're training and during the moment, but then at the end, it's exhilarating, right? So to
Yeah.
Garth's point, learning to be really mindful around how my energy is showing up, because energy can spread like wildfire, good or bad, and so can stress. So for instance, on the negative side for me, if I'm starting to be a little cynical, I can sense myself having negative thoughts, maybe negative comments, even negative jokes to myself, and realizing, ooh, I'm sort of skewing more towards cynicism rather than like optimism and my normal positive, upbeat kind of approach. I'll take a step back, maybe pop on some music, go take a breath of fresh air, get some sunshine, and try to reset myself so that I can be present for others. Because the last thing I want to do is spread that negativity or stress to other people on my team or who I work with.
Yeah, that's a good point too about taking a break because I know like we try just even like standing up, especially if you work from home, I think, because you're not used to going into the office kitchen to get coffee or something, so to be able to stand up and take a break does help you get rid of some stress. Victoria, on your teams or in teams that you're aware of, like what does stress look like when teams are stressed out? Like um, I think I have a couple of technical things, but were you able to hear me? Victoria, like how does stress look like?
I'm hoping you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Mhm.
Yep, we can hear you. Oh, Victoria? Okay, you know what? I'll go on to Brian then. I'll just sort of do round robin, but please, like any of you jump in. But what does stress look like in teams that you're familiar with when they're stressed out? What does that look like?
Yeah, to piggyback, the the word that Mika used, spreading like wildfire, and that's important to be aware of, your team members and what their natural inclinations are, right? You have some team members that are, they have certain personalities and temperaments that is just their natural inclination. And so when you observe some of that changing and shifting, that's a good point in time to get a little bit curious about what's going on. And then, the other, potential symptom of, systemic stress is withdrawal. So
Mm,
people are kind of just going with the flow. They're not engaging in conversations or they're not engaging with input because they might think, well, it's not going to matter anyway. And so I'm not even going to bring it up. So those are some, potential telltale signs.
yeah. Low morale is contagious, and so is stress as well, I guess, right? Mika, how does, in what you've seen, like how does stress manifest in teams that you're aware of? Hi, Victoria.
Hi, I'm sorry. But I did hit your question.
Okay.
Yes, and it deals with stress and how it deals with teams.
Yes.
That's a great question. I can tell, and I heard both from Mika and Brian and Garth their perspective, negatively and positively. From the team, as far as negatively, you can hear them kind of, chomp at each other and yell and scream and not working well together at all. We talk about that forming, storming, and norming performing program process. Is that when sometimes it doesn't work well, but then on the positive side, when it comes to teams, it's okay to have that storming session because you're getting those great, bright ideas, even when they're feeling uncomfortable. And it's the result of what comes out of that you get kind of the better solutions. So it all depends on what the situation is at the time. If they're just bickering and just not getting along as a team, but if you put them in a room and you're looking for something positive, sometimes that stress and that antagonistic kind of pushing on each other becomes more of a positive, becomes a positive result.
Yeah, stress isn't always bad. Mika, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but do you have anything to add about what, stress looks like on teams that you're aware of when, we have a stressed out team?
Well, I think it's sort of hard to categorize in general because it's such an individual experience, really, for many, right?
Right.
But when we think about it, I like to think about it through this approach, which is like a AAA framework. So I've seen people avoid stress. We talked about that. I think Brian mentioned, right? We have people that might alter it, so they're looking for solutions and through a solution mindset. And then also just accepting it, shrugging it off. What does Taylor Swift say? Shake it off and keep it moving and then reset. So I think there's
she's like the most quotable person in society now, right?
Yeah,
so anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's football season, so Taylor. I'm a Taylor team. So I think, but in the end, what I mean by that is as long as we're having healthy, productive experiences and teaching teams how to leverage the stress in a positive way, in a way where we're continuously learning, adapting, growing, and becoming more resilient together. We're building connection across teams because we're really inspiring teams to lean in and help each other in what I call instrumental assistance. Like, are we helping each other out? Are we asking the right questions? And Brian and Garth mentioned like being curious about it. How we ask a question to check on our teammate is incredibly powerful when we're experiencing stress. And how that can play out too is in how people receive feedback. So on teams, if they are not receptive to constructive feedback, you might want to take a step back and then again, through that AAA approach, alter how you're going to deliver some constructive feedback or offer some assistance.
Right. We have another poll question up that if everybody want to answer. So are your teams more or less stressed as compared to this time last year? So is there a difference between 2023 and 2024? So we'll just give you like the other poll question about a minute or so to answer. But I guess what, Garth, I'll give you this one. What are some of the triggers or triggers when you can tell your team is stressed? So what are signs for you when a team is having issues? What do you look for, I guess?
I think the individual and collective withdrawal, I think Brian was pointing at, we have our individual window of resilience, right? That kind of ebbs and flows based on our health, our mindset, our practices. But there's that window of resilience and tolerance for a team too, for a system, right? And so suddenly meetings are boring or non-productive, or there's snarkiness in emails. And so just as you manage your relationships and your family and friends, you can kind of notice that shortness. A point that I find a little bit provocative when it comes to, be it Mika's AAA approach or other modalities of addressing stress, though, in these moments is, and Mohammed mentions it's in the chat, and I think it's really, really important to bring up that stress is a real experience. So this is not meant to diminish the fact that it is a real experience, but it is all in here, right? Everything outside of us is merely stimulus, right? And that's proven in how people alter or adjust to stress, right? Someone can be on a battlefield and be perfectly calm, and others can be, crazy. Someone can be on a stage and be perfectly calm and others not. So my point there is to acknowledge with yourself and your team that this is self-generated. Yes, there are these real stimuli coming at us. How do we practice mindset modeling? How do we practice noticing that this is a creation in my mind and it's a real experience, right? That's sometimes hard to process, hard to digest when you have heavy workload and not enough time and lots of stuff coming at you.
Yeah, and that ties in with, there's a comment in the chat about someone creates a lot of her own stress, wants everything to be perfect at work, home, stores, when she's shopping, things like that. But a lot of it is self-generated. Brian, what are some of the things that you see as triggers for, when stress levels are increasing?
Yeah, and I think I'll tie this response, piggybacking with what Garth mentioned and called out from the chat, because I absolutely agree. I actually have some own, personal professional experiences where I believe that stress is a bit more self-manufactured than maybe what we give credence to. So an example here, and I mentioned it, during, speaking with the panel members. So I turned 40 in a couple of months, February 24th. And I just started planning for that trip this past November. Now, I've been turning 40 for the last 39 years. This is nothing new. It's been on the calendar for 39 years. Yet I thought it was a good time to start planning 3 months out. So self-manufactured stress, completely unnecessary. The other example I'll give is, working in project management. Certainly there are memos and regulations that drive a lot of our overall project schedules, but some of the work activities within the actual projects or within our team members, at times those due dates are arbitrary due dates that just this date seems to be a good due date. And so now we drive to that date and we miss that date, but there was really no true impact to the mission. But because we set that date in stone arbitrarily, that's also another way of self-manufactured stress. So I really wanted to highlight what was in the comment and what Garth mentioned there, as part of that response.
Which really ties into the importance of making sure you talk to your manager or whomever about what your priorities actually are. Somebody put in a question about what the difference between stress and burnout actually is, because they're not necessarily the same thing. So do any of you want to touch on that? Like, what does stress mean? What's burnout?
I'm happy to jump in and answer that. Sure. Because the World Health Organization actually defines burnout as, get this, long-term unmanaged stress, or stress that hasn't been resolved over time. So it's like the difference between experiencing a bad day and languishing. And do you know that elements of burnout can actually create physical manifestations in how your body shows up as well? This is probably no surprise. I'm going to give Garth some time to weigh in here as well. But the physical manifestations of burnout are quite significant. They can impact cardiovascular disease. They can impact how you sleep. So it's the difference between being tired and long-term fatigue, long-time exhaustion. And those impacts can have significant impact on your performance in terms of how you're attending, focus, productivity. Again, back to that cynicism, that level of disengagement, and how people are showing up. So burnout is not just a buzzword saying, oh my goodness, I'm so burned out. The World Health Organization actually attributes it to long-term unmanaged stress that is a result of occupational work. So I'll let some of my panelists weigh in too in terms of what they're seeing, the difference between stress and burnout.
Right. Anybody else? Garth, did you want to say anything? Not to call on you, but I guess
I think she hit it on the head. It's like, and I think it's that's okay. It's I think it's always good to bring sort of things that we accept readily. And I'll ask a leading question: what is intentional stress on our muscles and joints and bones called? Exercise, right? We just accept that's what we do. We stress those body parts to make them stronger. And so it goes back to Mika's earlier point that stress is neither good nor bad. It's a mental construct that we create. And there's a lot of research about this. I'd like to call out Kelly McGonigal's research about the upside of stress. And there's emerging research about our view on stress is what determines the impact of the stress on us. Right. Again, it goes back to like two people can be in an identical situation and have very different reactions to what one person calls stress. And so, again, practicing with the mindset that you are experiencing the stress and putting it in perspective with other healthy modalities is really, really important. Again, easier said than done, and always better to do it in community, because sometimes we have this mentality that I'm either stressed or I'm not, and I'm either broken or I'm not. I should just be able to be resilient and bulletproof and handle this. And that's just toxic positivity when it comes to the workplace.
Victoria, what are some of the, as you see, what are some of the biggest barriers to dealing with stress effectively? What makes it so hard? I think we all, no, we shouldn't be stressed out. Yeah, we all think that. But how do you actually, deal with it?
So that's a very good question, because I'm listening to just the sharing of information. How do we deal with that stress is recognizing what are our triggers, knowing who you are and knowing what is certainly under the book Emotionally Intelligent, is knowing who you are, and not everybody's journey has the same has the same path or the same journey, and you just can't necessarily put everybody in a specific box. But I think some of the challenges is recognizing what you can control and what you cannot control, and part of that is knowing yourself. And also knowing the environment that you're in. If you put yourself in an environment that it's stressful, how do you remove yourself from that environment? How do you prepare yourself to go into that environment? And then being able to supporting cast for those who are really kind of impacting those stresses on you. And I think that is critical. But at the same time, I think you have to control and know what you're walking into and be prepared if the environment is right for you, is the surrounding groups of individuals at that time is right for you. How do you step away and kind of refresh yourself over time? But I'd like to go back to if I could, from the standpoint of the question on burnout versus stress.
Sure.
This is the end of the year. And many folks like myself end up taking all of your vacation time at the end of the year. And that's because you put all your eggs in one basket and say, I'm done. And so part of that can be part of that burnout. But what I think I'm learning over time is that you have to break it up a little bit and not wait to the end of the year, not wait till whenever you've got, purposely take time off and take away to regroup, re-energize. Don't think. Find I call my no thinking zone. And whatever that is, to find an activity so that you are not thinking, to give your brain an opportunity to rest.
That's a really good point. Some of the most stressful times are right when you're preparing to go on vacation and relax and not be stressed. We have a question I just want to ask, and then I want to follow up with something that's in the Q&A that I think follows really well. But how do you deal with stressors that are outside of your direct control? So anyone like, say, Garth, Mika, how do you deal with stressors that are outside of your control? You can't do anything. We're limited sometimes in what we can do.
Do you want to take that one, Garth, or me?
We'll both take a stab at it. You go first.
Well, I was just going to mention, then I'll take the front part. This is like answering the question without answering the question. But I am really deliberate about scheduling and having routines for the things that I can predict in my life. And I did that intentionally because of some challenges that I was having. maybe you might experience this kind of stress. Single parenting 2 crazy kids in the DC area while navigating a career and a career growth and journey when I didn't have any family around the area to assist me. And so I had to plan really well for the things that I could control so that I knew I could like build in a little bit of wiggle room in terms of energy for when there were things, and there were always things that would come out of left field for me to be prepared for, even when it was uncertain. That helped me a lot to at least be able to show up in the moment for whatever was thrown at me. I don't know if that's necessarily a great tactic, but it's just something that worked for me. So like scheduling and having a routine for the things that I can predict so that I could have a little bit more energy and ability to react when there were things thrown at me that I couldn't. Garth?
No, I think that's a great point. You're on sure footing if you're able to control what you're able to control. I'm sorry, Garth. How would you follow up on that?
Yeah, it might be a little bit off topic or off sort of a more conventional, like give me some pointers about how to act. So I welcome like Brian's response to this. Like waking up to the idea that actually control is an illusion has been really powerful for me. Like we like to go through life thinking that, oh, I have influence over this and that, and really that's just our ego speaking to us and trying to reify our sense of being able to navigate the world. And that's really important. That's very natural biology. It has kept us alive as individuals and species for millions of years. And practicing to see is like, that's all just a mindset. That's a construct that helps me navigate and be successful in life and love my family and friends. And so what do we ultimately have control over? There's only one thing, and that's our mindset, right? All that other stuff that's coming and going is going to be what it is. And we want to show up and influence it. But we do that by fully accepting what's going on in here and then navigating, like, how am I going to show up in this next moment? So again, that's not as tangible as like go exercise or eat well or sleep. Those are all real things. But if I haven't trained the mindset to let go of the idea of control, all that other stuff is going to be constantly, the goalposts are constantly going to be moving on me.
I love that.
Yeah.
That really does put it in perspective. I'm sorry, Brian, were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, thanks, Candace. Garth, that was a great alley-oop. Something to add to that is you're right. Who are we to think that we are that much in control, right? And pride cometh before the downfall, and thinking maybe a little bit more highly of ourselves, than we should be. And this next comment, I think is regardless of your beliefs, but faith. And faith can tap into any area, but also thinking back to past experiences and prior experiences, right? At least from speaking for myself, I have a tendency to stress because, as Garth mentioned, I need to know the outcome. I need to know how this story is going to play out, which means I'm going to ruminate on this scenario, on this situation, because for me, if I think that I'm continuously thinking about something, if I continuously ruminate on something, that gives me a false sense of control. I can build up some fictitious stories in my head that make me feel a little bit better about the outcome when that has no application to like what's going to actually happen in real life. And then the other aspect is, look, fortunately, we are all here, sound, mind, and body. This is not the first time we've ever been stressed. We've been stressed 5, 10, 15 years ago. We're going to be stressed again in another 5 or 10, 15 years, and realizing that we all made it out. We're here on this session listening to us talk about this topic, which is great, but we're going to feel stressed again in 10 years, right? And so I think acknowledging that and giving yourself some grace. But yeah, that was a good remark that Garth mentioned as well.
I love that. And that reminds me, when I was in the end of my freshman year in college, it was the last night before we were going to go. And I was having some life crisis because, I was in college. So like my world was ending. And my friend, who I'm sure does not remember saying this to me, told me that even though that moment seemed like really big. It was just this huge deal. In the whole scheme of my life, it was just a blip and it really didn't matter. And he said that, and I have always thought that in my personal life, my professional life, when you can have a really crappy day at work and you have whatever it is in the whole scheme of your life, it's this big. And so that goes along with what you're saying. Like, you've been there before, and putting it in perspective, not that that always de-stresses you, but that was a great point. We have some good questions that I just want to make sure I get to. So someone said, how do you deal with a situation where you're being forced to socialize and you feel really stressed when you must socialize because you're shy? And in the past, when you've tried it, it went very wrong recently. Mm-hmm. So that's a hard situation because, some of us are just naturally, we're not extroverts. We're not, certainly maybe just in a work situation, but you have no choice. How do you deal with that? Any thoughts? I know that's a hard question.
Yes, I'll take that one.
Sure. Sure, go ahead.
So for the individual who asked that question, you probably wouldn't believe I am an introvert. And part of that is that I know, coming into the room, first thing you want to do is like, okay, do I feel comfortable in this space when maybe this is not what I want to do? What I've learned to do and what I offer as a thought is embrace the discomfort. Push yourself, and I've done that, push yourself even when you don't even want to be there. Try to find someone who might have something in common with you and start that conversation really, really slow. Don't go in big, and from the standpoint is there's nothing wrong with getting a glass, a soda or a glass of wine for a few moments because you want to show up. You want to show up and have to maintain, that level of discomfort for yourself because that is stressful. But to at least show up and embrace it. And it's okay. And what you'll find is, and what I found is that over time, that level of discomfort is just the unknown. You just don't know what you're walking into. This is not just who you are. But I think, over time, you'll find someone as well who doesn't want to be there. And then it's really embracing, those conversations. And then maybe you'll go somewhere else afterwards. But I find that while it may be uncomfortable, you are pushing yourself past that discomfort so that you can do it more and more the next time. And if you don't, at least you've tried it.
Right. And I think maybe if you give yourself a little grace and recognize that you're doing the best you can and you're trying and it's an incremental process, I suppose that's helpful too. Is anyone else have any other comments? Otherwise, I have another good question.
I think I was just going to add, there's some scientific tips I can just drop in here, and maybe I'll invite people to drop your own. This is just in terms of how you can manage stressful situations, whether it's interacting with people in a social environment or taking the stage in front of 1,500 people and keynoting and feeling a little stressed out. And there is science behind it. One is amp yourself up, maybe put on your favorite music or playlist before you go into an event or take the stage or go into the boardroom and address something. It just sets the mood a little bit. It can actually rewire your brain and neuroreceptors and help you step back. For those of you that love a good meme or an Instagram reel, maybe find some funny clips. I don't know. I love Ted Lasso. I love SNL. Even just faking it until you make it. Like, you can turn on your camera when no one's looking and smile at yourself. Maybe even pick up a mirror. Literally, there's science behind this. And then also, I'm sure Garth will give you a few tips, but maybe you all have some as well in the chat that you want to share as a community. But just some relaxation tips that you can do as well, like tensing your muscles and relaxing them. Of course, breathing. They don't have to be all complex. Or even the 5 senses. What's one thing you see? What's one thing you hear? What's one thing you smell? What's one thing you taste? It resets your brain just a little bit before you go into a stressful situation.
I love that. That's great. And and not to sound superficial, but is silly things almost like wearing an outfit you really like, or stuff like that, just so you feel a little bit more confident. I know that sounds really ditzy, I suppose, but little things like that, is that helpful? Because sometimes, if you feel like you look good, you have a little more confidence or something, or at least there's a level of comfort, if you're, I don't know, wearing something you like, or like I said, I know that sounds ditzy, but
Well, I think
I
that's
don't think it sounds ditzy at all.
yeah, I think that's where like ultra egos come in, right? And I apologize if I don't have the exact study and reference, but there was a study where there was some children of a very young age. They wanted them to cross the monkey bar. They never did it before. A few of them did it just on their own. A few were scared, and they asked a simple question: what would Batman or Superman do, right? And just that mental reframing pushed them out their comfort zone. So alter ego at 35, 40 years old is perfectly fine.
Oh, I love that. We have another poll question for everybody to answer. What do you do to alleviate stress? Meditate, work out, chat with friends, take a walk, read, or is there something else that you tend to do? So we'll give you about 60 seconds like the last time. I don't know if you noticed, but the last poll, I think it was like 52% of teams are more stressed this year than they were last year. So clearly that's not good. But there's another question in the Q&A I just want to ask, throw out to you guys. How do you deal with other people's stress? So how do you put barriers so that their stress does not affect you as well, trickle down to you? Garth, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, and that's so powerful, right? And then sometimes is it my boss? Is it my colleague? Is it my partner? Is it my child? So all these different dynamics of relationships and stressors are coming at us from all those different ways. I think it goes back, though, to the bedrock of what we were talking about before. Brian and I were alluding to about this mindset training, that this is merely a stimulus outside of us. And do we choose? And that's easier said than done, right? So you have to practice that choosing. You have to cultivate the conditions for that moment of choice. And we do that through exercise and good sleep and connection with nature and relationships. Mm-hmm. But we're cultivating those conditions ultimately to be in that moment of choice is like, how do I want to show up in this moment, right? So I'm a one-trick pony. All those modalities are really important, but it is mindfulness training. It is meditation training that holds the space of all of that, that helps realize all those conditions that you've cultivated, right? And so again, it's the ability to sort of pivot and see yourself sort of in that movie of you in relationship with that person and say like, oh, can I see, oh, there's resentful Garth. There's sort of annoyed, jealous Garth. How would I direct him in that moment to engage, right? Now, again, that's really easier said than done because in the moment you're fired up, you're ready to snap, you got this really catchy zinger that you're going to give that person. And so it takes time of practice and meditation to notice that these thoughts come and go. They're just natural, right? They're your brain protecting you. They're your brain trying to solve things for you. And being gentle with that and curious about that instead of hanging your head and saying, why am I like that? Why am I so impatient? Why am I resentful of my colleague? Seeing that in meditation practice allows it. So that's when the stakes are low. When the stakes are high, in the moment, like, oh, okay, a spaciousness of choice emerges. I hope that helps.
Yeah. No, I think so. Does anybody else have any thoughts? Just a reminder, everybody, to take the poll question so that, what are the ways that you like to alleviate stress? Meditate, work out, chat with friends, take a walk, read, or other. We have the next question, though. How can you effectively communicate to your team that you're burned out without letting down your colleagues? I think we all feel responsible for our colleagues, feel a responsibility to our colleagues, if for nothing else, because we're on the same team or something. But each of us can be burned out. So how do you deal with that without letting other people down? Brian, any thoughts?
Yeah. So, of course, this is going to vary based on the existing relationships with colleagues, right? My level of transparency with my colleagues now that I've been working with the same core group of individuals for 3.5 years is going to be different from maybe when I first came on board in the first 3 months. So I'll caveat with that. But it is important to acknowledge that there's some feelings and emotions going on, because what you don't want to get into is the passive aggressive behavior, right? Where that manifests and spins off into a whole bunch of other issues because either you were too prideful or you didn't understand the proper communication tactics to articulate that, hey, I'm feeling some kind of way in this moment. So as much as possible, and only you can understand whether there's going to be repercussions with that particular individual, whether you're sharing that with a peer or someone in your leadership. You'll have to gauge that level for yourself. But do approach that and be mindful, because that can spin off into passive aggressive behavior, which can lead down a whole nother rabbit hole if you don't acknowledge it.
Yeah. Just looking at the results from the poll survey, from the poll, how you alleviate stress, and it's pretty kind of, I guess, balanced. But I think like 28.5 people said other. So if you answered other, if you want to put in the chat what that is, like what some of the things you do are that we didn't list, I'd love to hear about that, because that's a good amount. That's a good percentage of people who chose something else. Somebody in the Q&A mentioned about burnout and asked about if it leads to depression, like how can it lead to depression, I guess, and then if it does, I mean, that seems like it's pretty far gone. So are there any tips for, because clearly I guess you haven't managed to deal with your burnout. So what do you do at that point? I know this is a really hard question.
I think, can I jump in on that real quick?
Oh,
and then I'll pass it off to the
absolutely.
other panelists too. First of all, I
Sure.
want to say something, hopefully it's validating. Stress leading to burnout does not indicate there's a lack on your end, that you did something wrong again or even more for unmanaging it. Can we just normalize that conversation, especially in the federal
that's very
government,
true.
where you're doing more with less? Work ranks as the top 3 stressors for everyone, any industry, every occupation, any industry. So I just want to make sure that we validate that piece of it. The second thing, though, is that there are some support there for us, whether or not you lean on your federal benefits or whether or not you're leaning on a partner's, or maybe if you're Gen Z, you're still on your parents' healthcare provider. That's great. But so I really want to encourage you to do a couple of things, and I'll pass the mic. One is you could take out your FEHB or insurance carrier provider card, flip it over, and there's an 800 number there. Or you could even go on the website. Often those benefits that we're already paying for exorbitantly every pay period or monthly, you can actually access additional resources and benefits that either the government or your employer or your partner are already offsetting for you. So take a look at what's there. It could be anything from a sleep coach to therapists and counselors for specific incidents that are happening. It could be financial planning, all of those stressors that add to it. So I want to encourage that. The other thing is to normalize what's called employee assistance programs. And EAPs have been around the federal government for a very long time, but they're often underutilized, and there's myths and misperceptions around what EAPs are. Traditionally, they were thought of as just for something like substance abuse, which is very important, but is not the only thing they do. They can even help teams navigate uncertainty, grief, loss, and issues like that when you are navigating stressful situations at work, and whether you're a manager or an individual contributor. So I really want to mention those resources because they could be helpful resources that you can use confidentially before having to disclaim that you're experiencing these sorts of things. And then the last but not least is creating these cultures of inclusion and belonging. And I know those sounds like buzzwords, but even having these kinds of very honest conversations and being able to lean in and check on one another, again, ask those questions differently, and create supportive structures in how we work, when and where we work, in order to get the best of us, each of us, and how we show up individually is incredibly important. And then I'll stop talking and pass the mic.
No, absolutely. So many good points. Anybody else want to jump in on that? Because otherwise, we have some interesting things as far as the other things people do to relax. One is playing the ukulele, which is not something I would have guessed, but I think that's very cool. Spending time with your pets, like cats and dogs, doing puzzles, praying, going for walks, listening to music, having quiet time alone with nothing on, no noise or anything. just standing and looking out the window. You know, I recently, I was fascinated by a squirrel, which seems a little, but I just was looking outside. I was stressed out, and I was fascinated by a squirrel that was trying to hide nuts behind an oak tree. And the squirrel wasn't quite sure if it was really hysterical. It wasn't quite sure if it was hiding the nut in the right place. So it actually went and buried it. And then it looked over its shoulder, I swear, and came back, and it moved it around several times. That fascinated me for like 10 minutes, but I forgot about everything else. And so I think the nature thing is a great comment. But I can't believe we're running out of time. So if you had to give, like, say, two takeaways to people today listening to this, what would they be? So Garth, like, what would be one or two takeaways that you would want people to keep in mind?
I don't know. I'm still stuck with the uncertain squirrel. I'm just that
It
is
was
in my
so
head right now.
I swear
Forever.
he stopped and looked over his shoulder. I
Yeah,
swear.
yeah. You uplifted my day, so I'm feeling okay. I
He
think I'm
was
going to kind of
adorable.
consolidate it into one. And someone mentioned DBT, which is dialectical based therapy, in the chat, and there's some foundational, really important notions in there. And this is going to sound paradoxical. We have these aspirations to be better at work, to be better in our relationships, to be athletes, to be healthy, to have a reputation in our community. A lot of us move towards chronic stress and burnout because we have not fully accepted who we are, full stop, right? There is always this sense of something out there is going to make me happy, right? A job, a relationship, an accomplishment, more knowledge. And so this is really hard. It's a lifetime of practice. This is not something that you watch a TED Talk and you're done. Practicing full acceptance of who I am and how can change emerge from that full acceptance. Again, it feels paradoxical, right? You first have to stop and say, I am not broken. There's nothing to fix, and move into the next moment to realize your aspirations and your intentions. So I really applaud the person that mentioned dialectical based therapy. You're talking about this whole portfolio of self-care, from exercise to diet to meditation to connection. It's all of it. Just like we wouldn't go into the gym and work on one machine, we have to enter this mental fitness gym with all these modalities and explore them with that same fascination that you explored that squirrel. So thank you for that. And thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you so much. Victoria, Brian, Mika, whatever, what are one or two takeaways that you want to leave with people? Doesn't have to be about wildlife, I swear.
Well, I have to jump off because I'm going to my next venue. So I want to say thank you so much. Here's two things. One, we are also getting burned out by meeting culture. So if we don't shift the skill in how we create more efficient ways of working, which doesn't include someone else's time to get my job done, we are going to continue this cycle of stress and burnout when it comes to work-related stress. So I really highly encourage you to take a tip out of all the hybrid and remote work experts out there, even if you work on-prem and on-site and do not work in a remote or flexible environment. You can create structures and efficiencies in how we work. And then last but not least, give grace, extend the benefit of the doubt, and show up for one another. And thank you so much for having me. I have to jump, but I really appreciate it and hope to see y'all soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Mika. I really appreciate it. Brian, Victoria, do you have any takeaways, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I'll add something. And this could be formal or informal. Find someone to pour into who, might be, a few years, behind where you're at, either in your career or your personal life, either in your community, mentorship program, affinity groups within your agency. I've been doing more of that this year, and I find that when I'm actually engaged in those discussions, our brain can only hold one thought at a time, right? So when I find myself pouring into others and seeing at how little old me can actually bring something fruitful to the table to, a younger individual, a younger professional, that's very comforting for me. So we are all good enough to where we can find someone to pour into.
Oh, I like that a lot. I like that. Victoria, do you have any final thoughts? Can you hear me, Victoria? Okay. Well, there's no problem. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank the audience for participating. Some of you said some really wonderful things and sort of put yourselves out there and made yourself kind of vulnerable in the questions you asked. So I just want to really thank you for doing that. And you guys, experts with speakers today, you really did genuinely give me some things to think about. You said some things that I'm actually going to carry with me. So I really, I want to appreciate that. Before everybody goes, I just have some quick reminders. Like I said earlier, check your inboxes tomorrow because we're going to send you a link to the training on demand. Before you log off today, make sure you download some of the resources we have on the console because they're great. And I just wanted to say again, like, thanks on behalf of GovLoop, NextGen, WEPA, GovEvents, American University. Really hope you enjoyed today's training, learned at least a little something, and want to thank you for all the great work you do as public servants. So have a great afternoon and a great holiday. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.